Start off, but then it's nice to have that one.
Right. I hope everybody enjoyed their Devon cream tea. So welcome to the last session. I just wanted to tell you how this is going to run. We're going to have the symposium now, which Tom is going to chair. And following the symposium, we'll have the presentation of the poster prize, and then we'll have the closing talk from Professor Eric Dreesen. I just want to draw your attention to the programme, and on the inside page, this is particularly important for you clinicians, the programme is registered for CPD. In order for it to be registered for CPD, we have to present the results of our feedback, and they won't accept the fact that Adrian Freeman says that somebody told him it was a good show. So there's some detailed feedback there, because and one of the things that we particularly want to know is whether there's a wish, a cry, a demand, a want to do this again. But that feedback has to be with these people within 4 weeks of the event. So we'll be sending you out an email around about, is it Tuesday? Yeah, around about Tuesday, to remind you about it, to give you the link to the site to give the feedback. And if you can, please, be sort of fairly prompt about completing that. You may or may not have noticed that the weather has not quite as nice as it was when we walked up here this morning. It's settling down again now, but when it rains very hard, and if it's raining very hard when we leave, it's quite hard to get taxis. The girls at the reception desk have got the details of any buses. Anyway, if you want the details of the buses, the girls at the reception desk will help you with that information. So without further ado, over to you, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So welcome to the symposium. This is a symposium on competency-based medical education. We've had some really interesting dialogue over the last 2 days on CBME. I mean, I think, we had some talks on national medical licensing assessments, which is based on competency-based medical education. We had a really great talk last night on the programmatic approach to assessment, which involves CBME, and also this morning by Eric Humbo on how, what it means, what does CBME mean, and it seems to me from what Eric was saying, it's really in the details, the devil's in the details about how we implement CBME. So, I mean, hopefully, I think we've got 3 very well qualified people to talk at this session, to talk about identifying emerging themes in CBME, but also challenges which we have, we've witnessed in our own programs across Europe, and I think you'll find it very interesting. We're going to identify examples of best practice, but also discuss at the end potential solutions as well. So hopefully you'll find it very interesting. So first off the block is Debbie Jarsma, Professor Debbie Jarsma, who's Director of Research Development and Innovation at Groningen. She's actually qualified as a vet, but we won't hold that against her. She's the Head of Research, Development and Innovation at Groningen and leads their medical education research programme, and is editor of Medical Teacher and also Perspectives of Medical Education. So Debbie, over to you.
Thanks. Before we're going to put up my slides, can I be very disruptive but ask people to come close? Because it's actually not a session about us talking. Well, we'll do a little bit of talking, but it's really about the discussion, and it's way easier to discuss when you're closer. So I see people like, well, who's going to stand up first? But I really, really like you to come close. And I'm really going to wait until you're here. It's wonderful. It's really nice when people actually do what you say. Yeah, I thought so, yeah. It's always balancing as a teacher, isn't it? Making sure you're strict enough, but sort of give the feeling that you have autonomy. Do you feel that? No, good. I've been in this field since 2004 when I started my PhD in veterinary medical education. And I hope you feel as energized as I do after the last 2 days. For me, it's every time I hear the story, and sometimes I hear the stories again. I've heard Case talk and heard his talk before. I've read Eric Holmboe's work. I've read many of your work, but you know, sometimes you get this aha-erlebnis. You need to hear things in different ways many times, and then every time you pick something up. And for me, these 2 days were really, the puzzle is coming closer. I can see the pixels and I can see the picture better. And I hope you have that same feeling. So that's what we actually want to do with this symposium, that you get out today and feel that you have something practical to bring home to your own institution, actually do something with it. We're picking up on the story, and most of the eminent speakers are in this room, from a symposium that actually was held at the EBMA. And can I see some of the hands who were people who were there? Okay, so not that many actually. I saw the speakers putting up their hands. This symposium was actually on competencies and outcomes, and the challenges and debates are going on. And we're picking up on that one, and like Val Vass yesterday, I was very privileged to borrow some of Pim Teunis's slides. He's the sort of shining star being absent here today. And he started the start of the debate and the dialogue. So does CBME actually work in practice? And he said, well, you know, we tried to implement it about a decade ago in the Netherlands, and we're still feeling a bit worried. It might not be doing what we thought it would do. And he said, and you've seen this yesterday, whatever competencies are, they don't capture what it means to be a healthcare professional. So he's getting a little bit worried. And he showed this one. And I show it again, because this is the work of my good friend, Harold Bach, and the work we've done at the veterinary faculty. It was implementing the programmatic assessment and looking at what the theory meant for practice. And Pim showed, you know, it might actually not go so well. Students experience more and more resistance to all these workplace-based assessment instruments as they increasingly perceive the assessment as primarily summative and not formative as they were meant to be. And he also showed this one. And you know, here's the point here. The 3 dominant problems with workplace-based assessment implementation. Poor understanding as the purpose of the workplace-based assessment, insufficient time, I've heard that many, many times today, and inadequate training of the assessors, of the trainers, and I've heard that today as well. So, and this is the slide that he used. Maybe we're putting a wedge between learning and the workplace by competency-based education. Well, this is what intrigues me and my research group. So we want to find out and understand what's actually happening. Why do things maybe work at a certain context, and why not? And phrased differently, we look at the intended curriculum or the curriculum on paper, and we look how it aligns to the curriculum in action and what students take out of it, what they learn. And sometimes these circles are nicely close by, but often they're like this. So we took this a little bit further. We dived into the workplace, trying to understand what does CBME, what does ChenMeds, as we adopted it in the Netherlands, mean for the workplace? So this is one of my PhD students I supervise, and she just published a paper in Advances. It's called What Supervisors Say in Their Feedback, Construction of the Roles in the Workplace-Based Setting. And just a quote from that one, and we've talked about this today in Eric Holmboe's talk as well. What we saw is that the patients were really seldom part of the discourses. So this was written feedback from supervisors to residents. It's written on paper. And when the patients were, they were constructed as objects of communication and collaboration, rather than being partners. And although some of the discourses are in line with what we expected, so what the ChenMed roles intended, others were really in striking contrast. So this finding suggests, and it actually adds to the literature I was just showing you, and Pim pointed out, it takes more than a competency framework, or outcomes, or EPAs, or milestones. It takes more than evaluation instruments, and it takes more than supervisor training to really change the culture. And I think you recognize this. We've been talking about this for the last 2 days. And this is under review. I actually thought, can I show it to you? But I'll show it quickly. We have some major revisions coming up. What we saw is how the CAMETS roles were constructed in practice. And what we saw is they're very integrated, as they were meant actually. And usually quite implicit during interactions between supervisors and trainees. And the language of the CAMETS roles was actually not adopted in the clinical practice that we studied. The CAMETS framework seemed only one of many factors of influence in practice-based learning. And actually what they pointed out is, that learning was way more about the patient records and other documents. So it's not to say that it's not working. We're intrigued by understanding how it might work, or maybe sometimes not. It's understanding what's happening at the workplace. So I was wondering if this is actually happening. Is CBME the wedge, or was there always a gap between learning and working? Is it always difficult to align those? And maybe CBME can be the bridge. And I think Marianne Hogart said it really nicely in her workshop. I'm a believer. I believe in CBME. I believe in workplace-based assessment. I believe in programmatic assessment, like I believe in democracy. Winston Churchill, I think it was Winston Churchill, said something like, we need an organization. It's by far not ideal, but I believe in democracy as the one organization for our modern world. I quite like that analogy. It's one organization. I think it works, but we need to really work hard at making it work. So we need to focus on the learning part. We need to focus on the working part. So the hospital routines, We do need to focus on that one. And I don't think it should be replaced by something like milestones, EPAs. For me, it's all in the same language. It's like this. It's complex. Everything is interrelated. Everything is interconnected. Does that scare you? Well, it does scare me sometimes. But I do feel energized in looking into this and working with it. So back to this research that we've done and looking at that quote. What we saw is it might be quite challenging for residents to combine the roles of both a well-functioning physician and a trainee in a setting that we found out was so strongly focused. It came out in the narratives on being fast, to the point, time-pressured setting. And if you spend as little time as possible with the patient, it was actually the message in the feedback. Then how can you manage to try to both listen, give comfort, deliver high-quality care? It's a real challenge. And here it comes the working, the learning, and the CBME comes together. So, is there light at the end of the tunnel? I do believe. And this is a paper from both Pim and Harold, looking at beliefs. So we need to address all these elements of these radars. And beliefs of our supervisors and beliefs of our trainees is what? Do you actually believe people are able to develop? Can they grow? Can they learn? There are some people that actually think communication is something that is just in your nature. It's very difficult to develop. Can we train people? Yes, I believe we can, but we need to put a lot of effort in that. And we tried, and we published a paper recently, to do a very short feedback training for our supervisors, just 2 hours. And it was done by our clinicians, by our head of the Department of Internal Medicine. And it worked. And it also worked for a long time. They're all small elements of the big radars that we need to implement. So coming back to Harold, and he really wanted to be here today, but he couldn't, so I'm trying to take the honors, but you need to think of Harold, not me. This started in 2011. It was a very interesting journey, and I'll tell you a little bit about the journal because I think it's a narrative that resonates. We started with this big group, and it's important because there were many veterinarians in there. But there was also Kees, and there was me, and there was Harold, and we were trained to be veterinary educationalists, I would call us. So we had this big group. Kees would come in, talk about his theory, but not only talk, but also reflect on the plans that people would have for the curriculum. So he was there. You were there for 6 months, and you would come in regularly. We had meetings with all the faculty, and that's just 150 clinicians. We know them well. I was trained in that department. They all know each other well. So if we had a meeting, everybody showed up. There were big full meetings. How different that is now in my university medical center. You know, if I organize a meeting, I'm happy if there are 10 people. And they're all over the country. Harold is keep moving. He trained all the faculty, and he not trained them only once, he trained them about 4 or 5 times. He developed and constantly developed together with the faculty, not on his own, not in some kind of educational development department. It was together with the clinicians. The students were trained. What do you actually do with feedback? How do you ask for more feedback? And I can go on and on and on. I think it's very important that we understand how this worked. And I think we need more best practices, and I hope you're willing to share those. For instance, the question this morning, and Eric said something like, you know, if we have apps and mobile devices. Well, that was a very difficult situation because in the stables with the cows, we couldn't get a computer in. The moment we had the apps, it was working really well. So all these little ideas that actually make the motor run. Thank you so much.
So now I'd just like to introduce René Teo, who's a cardiologist, also from Groningen. He is the chair of the Board of Examiners there and also leads on faculty development, and was previous chair of the International Progress Test in the Netherlands, so very well respected by the EBMA and other educationalists around Europe. And I'd like to introduce René to speak on this subject.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much for... this is the wrong one. Let's look. Looks better. The right one is on here, but we don't see it there. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to continue where Debbie left. And one of the challenges is, of course, the assessment of our residents. And Kees talked about it yesterday, Eric today. And when we talk about competencies, well, everybody knows the CanMET's competencies, and that's the one that we use in the Netherlands, where where we have a pointer here. Yes. Thank you. So this is a new CanMET's competency framework with the leadership instead of the manager, and in the middle the medical expert. And maybe not all of you realize this, that below this there is of course a definition of all the roles. The medical expert has to be able to integrate all the different things, the knowledge, the skills and the attitudes. and to be able to deliver safe patient care. Next to the definition, there's an elaborate description of it, and you can read it. I'll leave it there. And also a large number of key concepts. So it's not just a medical expert, there's lots of things below that. And it even goes further because there are key competencies. So the medical expert is further reduced to a number of key competencies, and it goes further down here. And each key competency is further reduced to enabling competencies. So if we want to assess that in the clinic, in our residence, what does that mean? It means that we have to tick all these boxes, and then in the end we sum it up and we have a good doctor. Well, that's quite difficult, as we already heard yesterday and this morning. And when you look at the enabling competencies, you see verbs like demonstrate, integrate, apply, perform, carry out. So these are all the do things, the things that a resident has to do, which is related also to increasing authenticity, professional authenticity. But on the other hand, well, we have the challenge of measuring it, and also the challenge of standardization of this measurement, which is quite difficult. When you compare it, for instance, to multiple choice questions, it's very easy to measure knowledge, relatively easy, and it's pretty well standardized, as we all know. It's very, I would illustrate it using this study by a group of Jeff Norman, and in which they looked at roughly 1,800 encounters where they looked at how often the expert, the different competencies were assessed. And the medical expert and the overall student performance was assessed in all encounters. Also the communicator did pretty well, 70%. But when we look at professional and medical expert, it was less than 50%. And even lower for the scholar, 22%, and the collaborator, 21%. And maybe not surprising, the most popular ones were the managers and the advocates. Well, between about 16 to 10%. Interestingly, when you look at these data, we think that we can assess the competencies. But when you look at the interdependence, it seems that there is a correlation between all the different assessments, between all the assessment of the different competencies. And the correlations are actually quite high. What does it mean? Well, that means that when we rate it, we are using an overall impression of our students, of our residents. And it's very difficult to discriminate roles. So that is an argument to go, well, to consider the overall judgment. And this is a recent paper by Deborah Clayman about competency assessment, milestones, EPAs, and they also stressed that it is important to use overall judgments. And we talked about that, well, in several workshops also. And what was also interesting here, that they mentioned progress. We should measure progress as well, not just one measurement, but use the progress of residents and use that for feedback, because it's important information for the learners, not just for the teachers. And this progress, of course, can be used as shown here in different EPAs, which is shown here also from a paper from Jeff Norman, that the learning curve for different EPAs can differ, but what is important, I think, that you should measure the progress. And thinking back of the presentation by Chris McManus yesterday, these curves look pretty well like the curves he showed for individual students. So if we imagine that this was not an EBA but a student, every line is a student, then this would be the one that needs remediation, but not at the end, but already at the beginning. At the other end of the curve, these fast learning student at this side, maybe you could register him or license him pretty earlier, spending a lot of time also. So instead of remediation, you could, well, what we may call immediate this student, and immediately as he reaches a certain level, give him his license. So the individual part of the individual education may be a part of the solution for the cost that we spend on training our students. Looking at milestones, another way of looking at, well, measuring certain achievements. What is very interesting here in this study by Takian et al. Is that, and that has already also been said by Debbie in the previous presentation, that it's important for faculty to be trained, because to have a good assessment, when we think of multiple choice questions, a good assessment, multiple choice assessment, what do we need for good multiple choice assessment? We need good items. So for a good clinical assessment, we need skilled, good faculty to assess our students. So, and also the integrated, so the overall assessment, I think it's important to use and not to forget about that. Summarizing, I would like to conclude that we need, well, the standardized as well as the non-standardized assessment methods, and that we really need large number of observations like Kees showed yesterday, and monitor the development in time and not just use an end of course test. And we should really realize that in order to achieve this, that we should invest in faculty development, because faculty will need to be able to answer this question: can this resident provide safe and effective and competent care in an unsupervised setting, or can he not? And if so, why or why not? I would like to close here, and let's continue with the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Benny. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to invite Ian Cohen to the stage. Ian is a previous postgraduate dean in London. He's now the assistant director at the GMC, General Medical Council for Education and Professional Standards. And he's got particular responsibility for education policy at the GMC and postgraduate medical education. He's done a lot of work on differentiating between competence and capability, and I'm sure he's going to have some very interesting words to say.
Thank you, Tom. So, yes, I'm one of those awful people who are regulators, so forgive me for that. What I'd like to share with you over the next sort of 10 minutes or so is a slightly different perspective. I know it sounds like you've had a fantastic couple of days discussing some of the real grit and detail of assessment concepts, principles and practice. But what I'd like to sort of try and do is set it in a slightly wider context. So obviously my responsibilities are on a different scale from an organisation or within a school. But to start, and just as by way of optimism, whatever it is we're doing is generally not doing too badly. So this is some data from the Ipsos Mori poll on public confidence in professions. And certainly trust in doctors is still the highest of all professions. And over the last period of time, from 83 to 2014, it's actually gone up. So the confidence in the products of UK medical training, both undergraduate and postgraduate, and the practice of those clinicians in established practice, the public are happy with you or with those UK trained individuals. Other professions are equally well regarded, so you've got the trust in teachers, you've got the trust in judges. Government officials, however, are not so popular, and touching on Eric's point this morning, politicians, it's, I'm afraid, going the wrong way.
And accreditors.
Pardon?
And accreditors.
And accreditors, well, we didn't discuss that. So, what I'm just going to briefly do, for those of you who are not familiar, just briefly introduce the GMC, offer that regulatory and system perspective. I'll share with you some of my headaches, some of my wicked problems, some of my challenging problems, and ask you for your help in addressing some of those. And I'm going to sort of share with you a couple of things that we've been doing, which I hope you will see either of interest or relevance to the debate on competency-based medical education. So we are the independent UK regulator. We're not accountable to government. We're set up under an Act of Parliament, so we're accountable to Parliament, not the government. And that gives us total independence from the day-to-day government management. Our primary responsibility is to protect the public, not the vested interests of doctors. It is to protect the public, and we do that by setting professional standards, and our good medical practice and associated professional guidance, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, and it's that context within which we maintain the trust of the public. And as I said earlier, it seems to be being maintained, and it seems to be robust at the moment. We obviously register and license doctors. Where things do go wrong, fitness to practice and restrictions on practice are also in our purview. So obviously we have some more sort of serious responsibilities. Particularly in the context of undergraduate and postgraduate, the GMC sets and approves the standards for undergraduate medical schools, and there are 32 of those currently in the UK with some 43,000 undergraduates. My particular purview is in relation to postgraduate education, and we have some 55,000 doctors in training and 102 specialties and subspecialties. But I think probably the most of any first world country, far too many, I would suggest. Just on that point, if we assume, in terms of workplace-based assessments, each of those doctors does approximately 30 per annum, we're looking at a resource of some 1.6 million workplace-based assessments a year. That is a huge cost on the system, it's a huge responsibility on the system, and I think it's beholden on all of us to ask, is that time, is that money, is that resource, is that professional time well spent? Do we get good value for that investment? The general landscape, we're responsible as the GMC for quality assuring undergraduate and postgraduate, so the medical schools and the postgraduate bodies are responsible for quality management, and local hospitals for the local provision. We set the overall standards that compare those things, and the Royal Colleges and faculties feed into the national indicative curricula. Obviously, I'm sure you've had some of these themes come out over the course of the last 2 days. Certainly in the UK, we're suffering from a degree of system fragmentation. Multiple agencies with multiple responsibilities. Not the characteristics usually of a high-performing safety-critical industry, because normally that relies on unitary regulation, so we're not in that position. But there are obviously multiple independencies, and some of the pressures on the service, I'm sure, are familiar to you all. In the UK, we've been particularly challenged with austerity, and we've been seeking reform of the Medical Act, but we are beholden and accountable to the Act. So there are some legislative challenges around regulation which are not in the gift of the regulators either. In the UK, we're talking about regulation reform, and currently we have 9 professional regulators in the UK. There's talk of some form of consolidation at the moment. And we obviously, with our European responsibilities, have to also enact European directives which also create challenges for us. And this is one of my wicked problems. Obviously the challenge and the particular concerns around Brexit will obviously play through in due course. So I hope what I'm giving you is this sense of this incredibly complex system And certainly I've been working with some colleagues around complex adaptive thinking and how we might better reflect and capture that complexity, and Debbie, you mentioned that earlier. One of the problems I think we have is that we often see assessment as a finite process, a fixed, finite game, if you will. But actually, when you look at infinite complexity, and the last international classification of disease was some 12,458 diseases, never mind comorbidity, never mind individual variation of either the patient or the clinician, you're dealing with an infinitely complex system. And I think we're getting ourselves into challenging areas when we try and make that too standard, too concrete, too inflexible. It's just a thought, it's just a challenge, but we're dealing with an infinitely complex system. So some of the things I'm encountering is, quite frankly, and it picks up on the faculty and it picks up on the culture and it picks up on the urgency in the environments, is this profoundly disappointing tick box culture, which, if it was the predominant culture, would mean most of those 1.6 million assessments may be less than worthless. So, tragic. There are generally concerns over assessment and regulatory burden, and I'll come on to an example of that in a few moments. I think we're also, and you talked about the wedge, and I wonder sometimes if our terminology and jargon, yes, necessary for concepts and ideas and models, but it often alienates and disenfranchises faculty and often gets in the way of the learners understanding what is expected of them. So just a caution about terminology and jargon. And I think we've got some problems with competence, which can be both an adjective and a noun. And I think we have this problem with competencies, which are discrete entities or units of performance or behaviour. And I think we've made it very complicated, and I think we could perhaps simplify some of that. I know you've talked a lot about the importance or the value of professional judgment, and I think there's a pendulum swinging that goes from lumping and high-level decisions to splitting right down to very microgranular, and the CanMeds, if you will, was a very good example of that, more sort of microgranular detail. But professional judgments only matter if they come with professional accountability. I used to talk to my OSCE examiners, and the OSCE sheet is just a piece of paper. They can complete it, but if they don't exercise their professional judgment, that piece of paper is worthless. It is meaningless. So we have to understand how we ensure that professional judgment comes with professional accountability and comes with professional responsibility. And I'm sure you've talked much about validity and also the challenge or tension with reliability in that context. And I think perhaps the authenticity of the assessment and the authenticity of what real professional behaviour is should be at the heart or the core of what we're trying to capture when we assess. And I've got a real problem that I think, having lots of tick boxes and having been to industrial tribunals where trainees present a whole stack of tick boxes where they're all deemed to have passed with no critical comments or no critical feedback, and the industrial tribunal saying you cannot deny this person progression because the evidence has created a false reassurance. So we need to understand how we ensure the quality of the data and the judgments that we make. And I'm just going to make this challenge because every period of time, and Eric, you wonderfully quoted Kuhn in your presentation this morning, CBME is our current orthodoxy. It is our current paradigm. And I suppose my challenge to us, and one of the things I've noted over the years, is where there are paradoxes or where there are points of tension in the face of an established paradigm or orthodoxy, that suggests we're not quite right. And that tension could be the very springboard to the next iteration, the next approximation, the next refinement. So just that challenge to leave you to perhaps discuss in a few moments with me. So I think competency has been phenomenally helpful. It's been very important that we've been able to identify each of the critical elements of building, in this case, a computer, but in our case, professionals. But I think it's it's a question of competencies being helpful but not sufficient. The foundation, a good example, the old curriculum, and in many ways it was a reforming and transforming episode, and many of the people in the room were heavily involved with it, and I think it has left a profound and important legacy on UK postgraduate training. But it had 1,100 competencies in it. It had the e-portfolio, and it was the first major launch of workplace-based assessment. So it was, of its time, a very innovative and progressive system. But when it was reviewed in 2010, after its implementation, John Collins and others commented quite critically in their report, Foundation for Excellence, that actually there was an excessive assessment burden for the return and the value that was seen. And if you look at the new curriculum that has just been approved and is being rolled out from the autumn of this year, those 1,100 competencies have been replaced by 20 high-level outcomes or capabilities, meta-competencies if you like, avoid the jargon, but these high-level things. And they fundamentally address the question, is this young doctor professional enough, safe enough, collaborative enough, able to work in appropriate conditions? And it's an alternative view. It's the lumping rather than the splitting. This is fitness to practice data from UK actual practice. So if you like, this is your ultimate quality data. This is where doctors have got into problems in the UK. Clinical competence, which if you like is the clinical skills and knowledge bit, not surprisingly, is a significant part of the referrals. But if you look at some of these other, so the next most is communication and respect for patients. That is a profoundly important capability. And I think one of the problems with the competency, it has this tendency to aggregate everything to a point of equivalence. So the competency with cannulating a vein may have the same weight perceptively as the competency of communication. Some of these are very much more important than others, and I think we need to reconsider the hierarchy. And so when you look at safety and working with colleagues into collaborative working, some of this is around, frankly, values and beliefs and dishonesty. So we're obviously not screening these people out during our postgraduate or undergraduate training. There's a wide range of other concerns. I'm not going to trouble you with them, but we see education in a wider context. And we've developed and recently launched a consultation on our new standards for curricula called Excellence by Design, which I'll briefly show you the key points of. And earlier this year we launched our Promoting Excellence Standards, which united for the first time undergraduate and postgraduate local training quality standards. And we're also responsible for approving curricular posts and programmes. What I'm seeing is, because the service is stressed and distressed, is I'm seeing problems with the educational quality that is being encountered. And we're also seeing problems with differential attainment in different groups. And this is just an example where these are different domains of practice in terms of handover, induction, supervision and so forth. But you can see over a number of years this organisation was red rated in many of these sections. We put this organisation into enhanced monitoring at this point, and white is acceptable and green is better. So regulation can have a positive and beneficial effect. Differential attainment, we're only starting to scratch the surface on this, but what we do know is that the experience, the relationships, the socio-cultural economic capital and the psycho-social and identity factors are central to making people feel valued, safe and effective in terms of their learning and performance. So belonging matters. Capital is also important. And I'll just leave you with one rather distressing image. And we've talked much about standardisation today. And I suppose my challenge back, both as an educator and as a professional, is that in my experience, my understanding is that everybody's uniquely different. And I think our challenge or our aspirations for standardisation comes with dangers. And this perhaps is best exemplified by this unfortunate picture, which I would suggest clearly demonstrates that one size does clearly not fit all. So let's bespoke our training to the needs of individuals. Let's focus on the individual performance of the individuals and make each learner flourish and achieve their potential. Assessment needs to work to that end and not be an end in and of itself. So competency has been helpful, but not sufficient. Discuss.
Is that you at the back, Ian?
Well, I borrowed it off you, Tom, didn't I?
Thank you. Right, have we got some questions? Got some microphones, hopefully. Yeah, would you like to come up and join me?
Let's do it.
So, I suppose I might start the ball rolling. I think
I'll remove the distressing image.
so. I'd like to ask all the panel, basically, the word competency-based medical education, in my mind, my interpretation of that is building blocks which are helpful to differentiate what learning outcomes are needed and how to define a curricula and to provide building blocks about how we can structure our educational programs and assess them. But I don't think competency-based medical education necessarily means we need to be assessing necessarily at the level of competence. I think that Eric and Case and other speakers over the last couple of days have given us very good demonstrations of where we can use the paradigm of competency-based medical education to assess higher levels of functioning. Rather than competence, we can be assessing capability, we can assessing outcomes through things like EPAs. So I'd like to ask anyone on the panel to suggest how can we implement our workplace best assessments better to be able to make them much more meaningful, so that they aren't seen as a tick box exercise, and so that we can do it manageable. And I think, Ian, you've already gone some way to explain that with GMC, and maybe you want to answer it, or maybe someone else wants to answer it, I don't know, but one of you. David, do you want to go first?
No, I'd love to hear some audience voices.
Yeah, some of the audience responses might be helpful.
You know, as a good didactic, you always need to wait a little bit longer, and then the questions will come up. And look.
Oh, well, good.
So, So we have ARCPs in the UK, the annual review of competence progression. And I tell you, I work in a teaching hospital, and it's very competitive to get there, and it is a fantastic training. And the day before the ARCP, I get loads and loads of emails of these tickets for the CBD, the mini-pets. And these are really good doctors. And the email is, "Dear Dr. Sam, I'm terribly sorry to bother you. I've been trying to get these ARCPs from lots of different specialties. I know you have an interest in education. I am desperate. Tomorrow's the ARCP. And I guarantee I almost free an afternoon the day before the ARCP to fill in loads of these that should have been done by others. Now clearly, it's a fantastic idea to do it, but they all get done by few people. Who haven't actually, a lot of the time I say, I'm terribly sorry, I can't do it because I haven't observed this particular mini case. It's supposed to be observed. Let's do the CBD. How do we get around this problem? It's fantastic to have these aggregates of observations over time, but it's not happening in real life.
Can I comment on that? Because, you know, actually I didn't go into depth on the veterinary example, but it all comes down to have your faculty really understand the philosophy. It's not the philosophy of tick boxing. It's the philosophy, and I think Marianne covered at a really nice workshop, it's a philosophy about narratives, it's about feedback. You know, we need to get away from that tick box. It's really about talking to your trainee. And somehow, it's very difficult to get that in, and I think one of the solutions is faculty development, getting that philosophy that they really truly understand. And I see the microphone going to a case who wants to respond.
Well, I think that we should stop spreading out large volumes of text over our clinical assessors. We should stop thinking about 200 EPAs. That doesn't work. And we should stop, I think, the summative corrupts the formative. And if you have all these data points, and if all these data points were learning points, you wouldn't have enough data points. You have too many assessment data points, too many summative data points. But if they were learning points, you wouldn't have enough.
Yeah. I agree with Debbie that it also comes down to faculty development. And what we do in our region is we have courses called Teaching on the Run. And we invite clinicians to come to these courses and teach them how they can, in their daily practice, use the things that the residents do for formative assessment, to give them feedback just in small encounters. And these are very practical courses where they are taught how to do that and to take advantage of the things that happen in daily life, in daily routine.
I just want to build on what Renee said. I mean, I think you got to build it into your work, and not everything has to be on a scale. Just writing it down. I used to have my faculty carry a 5x7 card that was folded over. That's 5 by 7 inches. Sorry. And just write something down you saw that day and something you thought they could do better, and just write it down and then talk with them. We've actually changed our mini sex form to where you actually start with a narrative, and if you want to fill out the scale, fine, but that's the least important thing. So it starts with what you saw they did well, what they can do better, and leave it at that. With regard to faculty development, workshops are really helpful, but again, it's just like anything else you do as a bolus. And if you bolus a leader assailant into somebody, what happens to it? Most of it gets third spaced, and then you pee the rest of it out. Same thing can happen with workshops. So you have to build it in longitudinally, and it doesn't have to be real long. We literally had 15-minute faculty developments activities, watching video, discussing competencies and approaches at our weekly faculty meetings. And so we would always start our clinical competency committee with 15 minutes of faculty development on something we were struggling with. Just build it into your work and build it over time. Longitudinal approach is much more effective than just trying to do a workshop once a year. So those are other suggestions that I suggest for you.
And if I could add to that, it's really getting it into the structure of the workplace as well. So every third patient, 5 minutes of that patient encounter, you're going to give feedback to the trainee. It's like those little things that we need to talk about more and share, because then you get the very simple ideas that might actually work in practice. Does that make sense? Is it?
It does absolutely make sense. The problem is that the word faculty is at the heart of this, and we don't have them. These are clinicians, F1s, SHOs, registrars, who are being asked to do as a consultants on an acute medical tech that they'll never meet again. And you haven't got that body of people that you can train. It's constantly changing. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
So maybe the challenge is that we have a theoretical model which is internally robust and self-reinforcing, but in practical terms is failing in the implementation that Eric spoke of this morning, the translation. And maybe it's too complicated, or more worryingly, doesn't have sufficient currency with the very professionals that are being asked to make the judgments, that they feel either ambivalent about it or so disinterested that they're not able to focus or raise their challenge to meet those challenges. So my concern is that we've heard this around the foundation programme, but the tick boxes get filled, the forms get completed, the paperwork gets all of the paperwork gets completed. But as a regulator, my concern is it's providing false reassurance.
And I think
And we're generating a massive amount of work and stuff. And maybe we need to think, is there another way of framing this which does rely on judgment, descriptors, the narrative, and other things? Like I say, 1,100 competencies in the old curriculum, 20 capabilities in the new. It's an alternative paradigm. I'm just offering it as a consideration.
So, I mean, I think a lot of that is about, probably, is about the interpretation of the implementation which happened about 15 years ago when really stocks and CVs were implemented initially. I think, personally, I think there wasn't enough discussion like we're having today at the time. And if we'd had meetings like this today, when we're actually thinking, we've got these workplace-based assessments, we've got this fantastic CBME paradigm. This is what we're trying to do, we're trying to provide meaningful assessments so we can actually really see how our training is progressing during, and also identifying poorly performing doctors during their progression in training. How should we go about it? And had meetings like this, I think it would have been much better implementation. It would have been, we wouldn't be having this discussion now. But just last question here.
Well, I wondered what you meant by standardisation, in that standardisation does not mean homogenisation, and it's often thought of as a way of actually enacting standards with consistent processes that are fair to students.
Sure. I mean, I think we spend an awful lot of time, and we do this on the healthcare side as well, trying to standardise the care package, the care bundle. And if you go to n=1, which is Mary, that Eric spoke of this morning, where you're dealing with systems that are infinitely complex, infinitely adaptive, the notion that you can standardise, you're only legitimately entitled to standardise if you know all the rules, principles and laws that relate to that. We're nowhere near that in healthcare. So one of the problems is we rush to standardisation ahead of any intellectual or legitimate right to do so. You know, it's convenient to have a protocol, it's convenient to have a standard way of doing things, but that does fundamentally presuppose that we've got all the underlying laws, principles and concepts nailed, and I don't think we have. And we make this mistake time and time over. We rush to protocolise or standardise ahead of any legitimate. And just in, you know, from an educational perspective, the infinite variety of people in relation to their personality, their nature, their nurture, the whole range of things, means that actually standardising their education. I've had a lot of experience in the simulation world. Everyone tries to standardise their simulation scenario when actually it is the most powerfully unique opportunity to create bespoke learning opportunities for the individual. But those are two fundamentally different paradigms. Are you after bespoke learning tailored to the needs of the individual, or are you after standardised learning which standardises so that we can say we've delivered what we agreed to? And if you look at the problem that we're having in the UK with differential attainment, which is where different groups by protected characteristic are not performing as well, what we do know is where there is an element of personalised learning or training provided for them, they do better.
Can I make that into simple vet terms? I think we spend too much time being on paper, doing things on paper. We spend too little time actually doing something in practice and trying to make it work in practice. You know, and probably it's easier somehow to spending time in a meeting room writing new APAs, writing new milestones, but it's actually the difficulty in getting it right in practice, and we tend not to spend enough time there, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry to put it in
and
blunt
I want to have the last word now. And I think this comes all the way back to the implementation which Eric was talking about earlier, and I think it's really nice that actually Ian was alluding to some of the stuff we talked about Thursday, actually, which is about differential attainment in the UK with Krista analysis tool. I think we've come full circle now. I think we've discussed a lot of problems about summative assessment, about focusing on linearity, about the fact that we need to have a programmatic approach to assessment. We need to be thinking about how we see BME, or whatever we're calling it, in a meaningful way, implementing workplace-based assessments meaningfully, getting faculty to understand the importance of assessments and working out how we can engage with faculty. And I've really enjoyed the whole 2 days, and I think this is really a fantastic session to sum it all up. And I'd just like to thank all for their contributions to that.
So I hope you all had a chance to look at the fabulous posters that were there today. And can I ask Leslie Southgate to come and tell us about the prize for the poster?
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. And I've got my beautiful team here, Janusz and Jose. And the three of us together assessed the posters. We each took one arm of where they're set out. It was a very, very interesting time, had some good discussions, and we would have each chosen one poster from our particular session. And then we discussed all of the ones that we liked best, and then we chose one. Do either of you want to add anything to what I've said, or have I got it right?
It was really a difficult choice because we are really impressed with the quality of all presentations. They were really all very interesting. And we were searching for finding a balance between the qualitative and quantitative dimension, and our final decision, that Dame Leslie will announce in a moment, is the choice of a poster that adds a touch of social accountability, of participation of local community to assessment.
Is it? Okay. And so I'd like then to announce, and I'll put my glasses on so that I get it right, a poster which was great fun, of great importance as well, well put together and raised a good discussion. And I hope the person who did it is in the room, and we haven't been sure about that. We'll see. And it's called Using Teenagers from Local Schools in Paediatric History Taking, OSCE Stations. And it was presented by Dr. Rachel Brooks of Cardiff University School of Medicine. Is she here?
It wasn't presented by her.
Who presented?
The second author, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, they were both here.
They were both there. Well, whoever presented it, come down, please. And when you arrive, you can announce your name so as I don't get it wrong.
I didn't present it, but they're both gone, so I'm just going to have to...
They've both gone. She didn't present it either. Anyway, what's in there anyway? Maybe we should keep it. Great work. You know how much we enjoyed talking about it.
Yes, no,
So-
I'll take it back on to Chloe. Oh, lovely, yeah. Take that, make sure they get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, there's a lesson for future conferences, isn't it? Don't go too early. You never know. You might be getting a prize. But I can promise you there won't be any more prizes. So this is the last session. Those of you who were here last night will have had a very full CV of the very distinguished and accomplished career of Professor Eric Dryson. So I'm not going to go through all that again. He's a great chap, and it's a real privilege that he's agreed to give this last session. It's interesting that earlier on this afternoon it really was raining very, very heavily. So it's nice that we've got a talk entitled Building the Ark. Eric.
Thank you, Adrian.
Now, what we've got to do is find your...
It's with the picture of the ark.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What a coincidence. I should start with a confession. When we have the picture. The title of this session is actually not my title. If you look it up, it's from a paper written by Lorelei Lingard. And she had sent it to me because it was published in the journal which I'm an editor of, and I had to review it. And actually, it's a mock title. So I googled it and said, wow, you have such nice examples. And this is really a nice title. And she knew that I had this conference. And then she sent me this PowerPoint. I didn't touch it. And she said, here, you can use it for this conference. So I did. So I ended up with this. This is what you call a column title. And it combines two aspects of a title. Which is the pointer?
You need it.
No, this is the wrong one. This one. Okay. The words that precede the column have the function to catch the attention. It immediately catches my attention. I don't know what's with you. And what comes after the column is to describe what can you expect in the article. And this is a mock title, so there's no article. But immediately I had all kinds of memories about personal experiences, because I changed in 2000 law school from medical school to help to implement competency-based assessments. And maybe one of the advanced assessments is with portfolios. And for a long time, I was the face
of the portfolio Maastricht. Mr. Portfolio, they called me. And is there a threat? Because if we should help our learners and teachers to survive, there must be a threat. The water must be rising. The oceans must rise. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes by a student from one of the academic centers in the Netherlands, not from Maastricht, and he said, very cute, it's a portfolio with better suit my system. Now, I have received less cute feedback when I started in 2000. I've been in lecture halls like this with students, my own students, yelling at me. I was at the day care center of my oldest son, and one of my colleagues, a neurologist, shouting at me, yelling at me. I've been in rooms with program directors, GPs, who yelled at me. This stupid portfolio of yours, Eric. Recently I was in Vienna, and an Austrian resident, I remember that when you used the example, Eric, this morning, I suggested you could ask the nurses to provide feedback, and then a resident sitting in the back of the room stood up and said, over my dead body, feedback from a nurse. So, work-based assessment can be at least perceived as a threat. The good thing is, we are now 16 years further in time. Now, in all our programs, in life sciences, health sciences, medicine, portfolios are there. In the master of mini-CX, multi-source feedback, all those. And the portfolios are there also because our students ask them, can we have portfolios in all the programs? To my surprise, because when I started, I can remember this lecture hall with more than 300 students. Not a nice experience. Now, why? What's the problem? How can we help our students? And I think the key is, and it has been said several times the last day, to make assessment more meaningful. You have used, I think, literally those words. I think Kate you have used, and other people also heard. That's I've studied portfolios and work-based assessment for 16 years. And one of the key elements is if you can profit from it as a teacher or a student, then it's not a threat, but it empowers you. And that should, work-based or competency-based assessment should empower our learners and teachers. Now, a question. I borrowed this one from Chris Harrison. Who will fly back home? Tonight or tomorrow or Monday? I do. Okay. I fly with the KLM, and let's imagine KLM has implemented work-based assessments. They have a portfolio with the assessment details of their pilots, and they open that up for the public. So you can choose your own pilot. Look, this is an example by Chris Harrison. I really love it. And 4 criteria or 4 competencies. They all have the same average score, but I love the teamwork of pilot 1, but probably will say maybe I'll take a flight later. But actually this is a way to communicate feedback that's not meaningful for learning and not meaningful for assessment. So you have heard the word narrative. Wow, we have heard that a lot. So this kind of assessment has more meaning for both learning and assessment. Simple. So we introduced this in 2001. And that was new. And our examination committee or licensing bodies felt extremely uncomfortable because they were used to this course. And so we had a special audit from the national accreditation because we were going to assess doctors with words. Were we doing a good job? Now you have learned yesterday from Case, we're still doing this on this way. And then I've brought some of the scientific work of some of our colleagues. So I've brought work with me. and this is a book, you don't look happy, Marianne, he's sitting there. But actually, this is one of my favorite PhD theses. I think 6 or 7 studies, but especially the discussion section I like. And Marianne is a very strong thinker, a very consistent thinker. So she said, this is the cover of her book. Now we are climbing the pyramid, and we are going to assess performance. What are the consequences? And what are the consequences for the philosophy under assessment? What are the practical consequences for the assessment procedures? What does it mean for rate recognition? And she started to study that. And when we started in 2001, my intention was to standardize our raters. And Marianne, you made it very clear to me and to others, you can't standardize the assessors. The assessors are, assessment is idiosyncratic. We have all different theories about performance. Maybe Theo, you really like when a student can develop. You were talking about development. And maybe Debbie is more, I want to be sure that they have met these standards. So you will, and you are trained and working as a cardiologist, and you are trained and as a veterinary and now working in medical education, so you will have different perspectives. And you can standardize. Another lesson was that it's very context dependent, how you assess. And so that work influenced me a lot. And then you had Andrea Gingerich from Canada. I think she finished her thesis 2 years ago or last year? 2 years ago. And she said, okay, Marianne has taught me that raters are idiosyncratic, but I'm questioning that. And she did that by combining language and very advanced statistical techniques. I was one of the assessors of this PhDs, and wow, this was a job to assess this thesis, because she was really combining the narrative and the standardization. So, and what she found, maybe you all look differently to me. Maybe you think, what's wrong with this man? He brings books with him, and pictures. Go away. It's almost weekend. You are standing in the way of my weekend. And maybe Case is intrigued and think, oh, I like this. Or not. And so you love, but what Andrea showed in her research, you can group. Maybe there are 2, 3, or 4 perceptions of a performance. So for example, if you look, if we have a resident who is friendly, maybe some of you will assess that resident as friendly and open, and maybe you will assess this. You see the same, but your interpretation is it's too fake and not clear enough. And so you can, people differ, but they are not that differently. So you can group, and that's also very important for learning. That for this resident, that some patients or colleagues will see him as friendly, and other colleagues could make the interpretation of his behavior that he is too fake. Now, if I had known that science was such fun, I had worked harder on high school, because recently, you talked about this yesterday, Sifra Ginsburg defended her PhD last month. I had the honor to assess this PhD. And again, wow, I needed a dictionary. And I heard from the other assessors too, because she combined linguistics point of view and politeness theory and statistics. And what she found is, okay, often we are a little bit fake. Maybe when we had, afterwards when we discussed, you didn't really like this lecture, you hacked it. You don't say that directly. It was an interesting lecture. And then I know enough. And what she showed, actually, that the assessors were quite good if you have narratives that they could distinguish between competent and incompetent, but also they did a better job with the narratives than with the scores. Wow. So that's good news. I could summarize those 3 PhDs in this way. This is what Marianne said. We all did. This is what Andrea said. We differ, but that these differences have meaning. They are important. And Sifra says, okay, with all those fake and different language, we come to the same judgment. So that's good news. So, what kind of lessons can we learn from this? Make narrative information. That's vital for assessment and learning. Professional judgment is vital for assessment and learning. And assessments can't be standardized. You don't want to standardize them. The differences are important. Now, so this is what our teachers should do. But then we had this discussion of this afternoon. This is how we make it on paper. But then what actually happens is this is one, a quote by Patricia O'Sullivan. When educators in graduate medical education first focused on competency-based education, I remember a rush to find assessment instruments. I struggled to have those same educators pause long enough to think about how they would teach the competencies they plan to assess. And we really focus on assessment. I was really pleased, I already told you, by the presentation of Eric, that you started with patient care and learning, and not with the competencies and the assessment. Because what we actually often do, and I'm responsible for that too, is we replace the teaching for assessment forms. Often I think, how we implement mini-CEX is like we delay the feedback. Some of you in the back said, we don't have time, or they sent it me a day before the meeting, all those forms, and then I fill them in. Useless. Then, okay, I experienced this with my colleagues, this is happening. Why is this assessment so dominant? I was surprised at that, because I'm an educationist for background. And then, Kees and Eric, you both mentioned him. This is the PhD of Chris Watling, a neurologist from Canada, and we started to puzzle. Chris has something in his personal history. He earned money as a piano player for ballet lessons. So he has both been trained as a musician, and he has watched hundreds of ballet lessons and how feedback was provided. When he was a student in medicine. So how can we look at the influence of the context of the learning culture in medicine? So we started to compare people who were in medicine and who were in music or in sports. And what we found is that medicine's professional values, patient safety, we have heard this a lot, efficiency, time, autonomy and independence are pivotal for medicine. This is what we want for our patients. When I'm a patient or family of a patient, I want this. I want efficient, safe patient care, and I want a doctor who can, a professional who can work independently. However, the effect on the learning environment is detrimental. This is what happens when we implement our assessment instruments. Accountability is dominant. So we automatically, focus on accountability. I'm 100% sure, Eric, that Mary, your patient, was Mary her name? Yes, Mary. She will end up with a checklist with scores, because that's how we make visual patient safety and accountability. Teaching time. Always hear, there's no time. But it's actually not time. Time is a very strange and difficult concept, of course. It's not time, it's efficiency. As a doctor, René, when I'm your patient, I expect you to be efficient. And that the care for me is organized efficient. And that's when I'm working and when I'm your resident, I'm not going to bother you and ask you to observe me, because I take away from your being an efficient doctor. And that makes observations problematic, because I don't want to ask you for your time, because I interfere here with your efficiency. And also, another aspect which I didn't realize, but Kees yesterday said we have to organize our assessment in a developmental way. And you also mentioned that, and you showed me learning curves are not like this. We organize our assessment not in a non-developmental way. Why? Because it can happen when you're a neurosurgeon, you use that as an example, that maybe in the year 3 you work independent in a teaching hospital, and then you come back in the academic center and you can only watch. And that's one thing. And another thing is, now I'm independent. I can do it alone. It's like on a bicycle without the side wheels. And then my teacher comes in, Eric comes in, and then he puts on the side wheels. I'm not anymore independent. And that's where we are progressing to it, that we are entrusted with independence. So, the lessons, less focus on assessment, integrate learning and reflection in daily work routines. That was mentioned several times by Debbie. Eric, you had those co-production. I really like that. Integrate observation into work schedules. And then, Ian, one size does not fit all. In an NHS organized healthcare that probably works differently than in a teaching hospital in the Netherlands. Organize observation and feedback in a developmental manner. And I will visualize that. This is the independence and this is time. So when you're first year in an internship or a resident, and you want to be observed. But in the second year, maybe again. But in the third year, maybe you change roles. You ask different feedback. Maybe you're going to observe your consultant or one of the students. And in the end, you hope that you can practice some teaching. So we should organize our work-based assessment in a more developmental way. And I'm sorry for the learning curve error. I learned it this morning, and I already had uploaded the presentation. Otherwise, I would have changed it. Okay. Now, my last point before the weekend. Also a quote that I like a lot, and that I experienced. That this is where all the yelling is about. And this word, the mandatory. And it was Brian Hutchins who made clear to me that combining reflection to open up with assessing it, it's like going to the church, the Catholic Church, and confess your sins. And then a faculty member approves this or says you have to remediate or whatever. And everybody dislikes that. You don't want this. So, but I want my doctor to be self-critical. If you evaluate Charlotte Rees, are you still there? I don't know. Okay, mentioned evaluative judgment. Even you want your doctor to be self-critical because he is independent, autonomous. So the doctor should be. Now we organize it via assessment. Now, feedback of reflection only works in a dialogue. It's a very simple lesson. Somebody has to help you to reflect. Now, Kees was definitely my mentor when I entered medical education, and he was the one who in the last decade, asked me questions, confronted me with things. Always said, Eric, you should improve your English, things like that. I had to write a portfolio for him. He said, now you bother all our students with portfolios, and even our teachers. I expect a portfolio of you. Now I'm the chair of the department. Now I can ask Chase to write a portfolio and ask him the questions. So somebody who discusses all those information in the assessment and your reflection is essential. So provide a mentor, somebody who discusses it. Otherwise it won't work. And if I'm quite optimistic, although it's really a lesson that I learned, the culture of medicine makes it difficult to implement a concept like competency-based education. However, it gives also a lot of possibilities. And I think it could empower our students and our teachers, and that they even like it. Like, for example, we have a graduate program, and Sylvia Heinemann is the director of the program, and there you see it happen. There really, you see conversations between mentors and students, and they both use the information provided by the assessment to make progress. And then it works. But it's very vulnerable system. So, a lot of thanks for your attention. And I think the weekend can start. Maybe some questions, I don't know. That's up to you, Adrian. Thanks a lot.
Actually, Eric and I had a discussion, and we decided that we wouldn't stand in the way of your weekend any further. But if you want to ask Eric some questions, he'll be around here for a little while. There is one final thing I want to say, and that's actually, we've had some great speakers, but the best part of this has been you, and thank you very much for coming to see us down here in Exeter. Thank you.
Here it is.